Draping is an important and beautiful part of fashion design. It is magical to watch a design grow right in front of your eyes. To see a square of fabric be transformed into an intricate work of art. How folds can be manipulated to create design details I have never even thought about. Draping is about problem solving, about playing, and about creativity. Welcome to another fun fashion design lesson. Let's take a look at our lesson quote. I drape a lot. I cut. I have to touch. For me, it is almost impossible to start without that. Today's objectives are to define draping, to differentiate between draping and flat pattern making, to identify some draped garments, to list the tools of the trade, and to explore the process of draping. I hope you enjoy lesson 2, from drape to dress. If you have any questions, please don't be shy. Morpheus is here and keen for a chat. We are going to start this lesson by looking at what exactly draping is. So what is draping? Draping is the process of positioning fabric and pinning the fabric to the dress form to create a three-dimensional garment, either from a sketch or from scratch. The great thing about draping is that the designer can immediately see what the design will look like on the body. This gives the designer the opportunity to alter any design or fit problems before transferring the pattern onto paper. Another reason to consider draping is because some designs are impossible to make using flat pattern making techniques. Draping gives you the opportunity to experiment and determine how certain fabrics behave and what they are capable of. This enables the fashion designer or pattern maker to make better decisions when considering the fabric for the design. Draping is considered to be the more creative method of pattern making, because during the draping process, designers can stray from the sketch and develop more interesting designs and one-of-a-kind garments. This is exactly why many haute couture designers prefer this method of pattern making. So when do haute couture designers use draping? They use it when they are creating a special garment for a client or an event. They use draping to transform the sketch of the design into an actual garment to better visualize how it will look on a body, and also they use it as part of their creative process where they are free to explore new forms, shapes, and ideas. In the beginning, clothing was probably made from lots of animal skins, furs, grass, and leaves. You can imagine the incredible impact the development of weaving meant for people. Suddenly, humans had woven panels to wrap, tie, and drape over and around their bodies. Because weaving fabric was a process that took quite a long time, cutting the piece into different parts to create a garment was not even considered. The woven panels were just too precious. We looked at the history of fashion in Module 2. There we studied some of the oldest garments such as the chiton and peplos of the ancient Greeks and the toga worn in the Roman times. These garments, as you can see, only consisted of one or maybe two panels of fabric, but often elaborately draped with beautiful folds and interesting fastenings. Quick true or false question for you. Are you ready? Only flowy garments with lots of movement can be draped. Is it true or is it false? The answer is false. Even though a lot of draped garments like the ones we see from history have a lot of movement, any garment can be draped, even fitted garments like trousers and corsets. In fact, when draping close-fitting garments, you can often get a better fit than with flat pattern making. Let's play another game. Out of these garments, which one do you think was draped? This is another trick question because all of them are draped garments. Like I have said before, you can create any garment by draping. This actually shows the process of the draping for the corset and the trouser. Before we get really into draping, let's look at some terms often used in the draping world. Right, first up is grain line, and you already know this, but this refers to the direction of the yarn. So let's quickly go through the grain lines. The straight grain or the warp grain runs parallel to the selvage. The cross grain or the weft grain runs perpendicular to the selvage. And then we have the bias grain, and this grain runs at a 45-degree angle to the selvage, and this is the grain that has the most give and flexibility. The selvage that we've been talking about is the side of the fabric. Nips, these are small cuts into the fabric. And then we have our anchor pin, which is a pin used to secure the fabric when draping. Oftentimes, the anchor pin is placed on the center front or the center back. And then we get our bust point. This is the fullest part of the bust. And baste, which means to hold a seam or the fabric in place temporarily by hand sewing it. We are going to learn a few new terms throughout this lesson, but the definitions will be given and further explained when we get there. Before we look at the draping process, let's look at what you will need to create amazing draped garments, starting with the tools of the trade. Firstly, to drape you need a dress form. We will look at the dress form a little bit later, but without one, it will be really difficult to drape, right? You will also need fabric. These two are the most important parts of the draping process. You will need scissors, and also a lot of good quality pins, and a wrist cushion is also super helpful to keep pins close at hand. You will also need any mark making tool like a pencil, chalk or fabric pen, and dark twill tape to mark out lines. You will need a measuring tape, and then paper rulers and a tracing wheel for when you transfer the pattern onto paper. Like I said, the dress form is the main piece of equipment needed to drape. There are many different types and sizes of dress forms available. If you want to invest in one, choose one that suits your circumstances and fulfills your needs. The measurements of these standard dress forms usually follow the specifications of commercial sizing. Most times, a size small or medium is used for the pattern drafting stage, and then that pattern is graded into other sizes. First, we have our neck band. Now this is very close to the neck, as you can see, so oftentimes we alter this and manipulate it to be a better fit on our pattern. Then we have the shoulder line and the arm sky, which is the term used when referring to the armhole in pattern making, right? Then we have the very important center front line and the bust line. On the bust line, you will find your bust point or the apex. The princess line divides the shoulder and front in half, as you can see. And then we have the waistline and the side seam. Now, before you can use the dress form, it is always a good idea to mark and define the bust, the waist, and the hips. To do this, you need some cotton twill tape. This you can find in the trims or haberdashery section of most fabric stores. I prefer using a contrasting tape of about 0.5 to 1.5 centimeters wide. To mark the bust, start by pinning the tape to the side seam and wrapping the tape around the fullest part of the bust, pinning it into place every few centimeters. Usually, figure forms will have a seam or tape or a ribbon marking the waist, but if yours does not have it, simply wrap the cotton tape around the smallest part of the body, pinning as you go along. And then to mark the hip, which is about 20 centimeters below the waist, secure the tape on the side seam and wrap it around the widest part of the body, again pinning every now and then. With all of these, it is important to keep the tape parallel to the floor to create a nice horizontal line. These will be your guidelines while draping. Like with flat pattern making, there are processes in place to guide the designer through the pattern making journey, right? But like most journeys, we require a vehicle to get from point A to point B. Fabric is that vehicle for drapers. Do you remember when we discussed the properties of fabric? Well, to be a master draper, you require the appropriate knowledge of the fabric's properties and characteristics. You must be able to distinguish between different fabrics and choose the one that will enable you to create your vision. So what are the characteristics we must look at? The hand of the fabric, so how it feels. The weight of the fabric, so you will choose either a light, medium, or heavyweight fabric depending on your design. The construction of the fabric. If you have a woven piece of fabric, you will have to create darts to get a nice fit if your design is close-fitted, but if you have a stretch fabric, you do not need darts. The type of construction will thus contribute to the final look and outcome of the design. And the surface of the design. When it comes to draping, you really need to take into consideration the face of the fabric, the print, the nap, the grain, in order to make your vision come to life. So, what fabric is ideal for draping, or at least for beginner drapers? Like I've said, it really depends on your design, but when it comes to weight, light and medium weight fabrics such as chiffons, silks, voile, sheer cottons, and organzas are most suitable for draping. These can be a bit expensive to work with though, especially if you are developing ideas and experimenting. That is why we use muslin to experiment with. But what is muslin? Often referred to as toile, muslin is usually used during the first stages of draping as it comes in a variety of weights and is an inexpensive, plain weave, loosely woven material made from cotton. Muslin is also easy to mark, which is key if you want to transform the draped fabric into a paper pattern. One of the most important rules to keep in mind when draping is to drape with a fabric that has similar characteristics as the fabric you intend to use for the final garment. But why? You can imagine if you drape something out of chiffon, when constructed in denim, some of the details may get lost, right? The design will be completely different because the drape and the weight influences the finished look. Thus, it is important that the fabric you drape with represents the characteristics and the texture of the actual fabric you will use for the final garment. First, let's look at how to drape with the different grains to get a look and feel of how different a piece of fabric can be. I suggest you cut 3 panels and mark in the different grain lines. Let's look at the straight grain or the warp grain first. What can we see when looking at this draped fabric? The fabric has formed 2 very distinctive drapes that flare out from the bust. The drape almost resembles a square because of the vertical stiff folds. Next is the cross grain or the weft of the fabric. Over here we can see a bit more flare at the hips. Unlike the straight grain, this drape is not as distinctive, but instead creates more volume at the sides. This is because the straight grain is now running horizontally, which means it is trying to push the fabric outwards. And then we get the bias grain, which is at a 45-degree angle. This, as you can see, is the most flexible and forms drapes that are less defined and softer than the straight and cross-grain drapes. From the soft folds that are created by playing with the bias grain to the distinctive folds from the straight grain, these characteristics will transform into garments as you drape. It is thus key to understand each grain's potential and learn how to drape with each one in order to help you bring your vision to life. Are you ready to learn about the draping process? It is a bit different to flat pattern making. Fashion designers usually drape the design in different sections, for example the front bodice, then the back bodice, then the skirt, and so on. When creating a symmetric design, only the right side is draped. If the design is asymmetrical, you must drape both sides. So let's go through the general process and steps for how to drape. We all work differently, so I suggest that you start by playing with the fabric on a dress form and explore and develop your way of working when it comes to draping. The following steps are to be used as guidelines. First, prepare the fabric. Then you can start draping and marking the fabric. When you are happy with the design, you can true your pattern and trim the pattern. Use this trim pattern to check the fit and transfer to paper when you are satisfied with the end results. Don't worry, we are going to look at each step in more detail now. First, you need to prepare the fabric. This involves measuring and cutting the fabric into usable sizes, pressing the fabric, and marking in the grain line. After you have prepared your fabric, you can start draping. You can either refer to your sketch or drape from scratch, forming and pinning different darts, pleats, and folds that give shape to the garment. Once pinned in place and you are happy with the design, you need to mark the muslin. This needs to be done on the dress form to indicate all the important details such as seam lines, darts, pleats, and folds. You can mark this with a pencil or a fabric pen. What you need to remember though is to drape your design in sections and also mark it in sections like you can see on your screen. So this design is a semi-princess bodice. And you can see in the first image, it is the center front pattern piece. The side is the second image. And then image 3 and 4 will be the back. So image 3 is the side back that will connect to the side front. And then image 4, the last image, is the center back piece. After you have marked the muslin, you can remove it from the dress form. The next step will be to blend and to true the pattern. Now you guys already know what that means, but smoothing out the lines and making sure they connect and that the measurements are correct are a bit more intense when draping compared to flat pattern making. You can also add your seam allowance when necessary and trim off any excess fabric. After you have trued and trimmed all the pieces, you can pin them together with the pleats, darts, and any other detail pinned and placed back onto the dress form to check the fit. This gives you the opportunity to make any alterations or to add additional details before transferring the pattern to paper. When you are happy with the final look and fit of the garment, the muslin is removed from the dress form, pressed flat for accuracy purposes, and transferred to paper. It is important to transfer all the necessary information like the seam lines, grain lines, notches, markings, and any other pattern information. This is an example of how something fitted, like a jacket, can be draped. This was created for Christian Dior's Cruise 2020 collection. And this is an example of draping something more flowy and feminine. This is more my style. In this video, you can see silk chiffon being draped and knotted for the Dior Spring Summer 2020 collection. Which fashion era do you think inspired this design? Designers, remember, if you purchase the toolkit, you can refer to the webinar slides and summary notes whenever you want to. You also get to keep these after the course, which is useful when you start your own fashion design career. Creating clothing is an art. From dreaming of the design to the sketch to drafting the pattern and constructing the garment, it really is a form of art. Don't you agree? Like any other form of art, the construction of clothing does come with its own challenges. In the next lesson, we will look at the process of constructing garments and how to combine different techniques in order to show off your skills and be a proud wearer of your piece of art. Let's pretend that you have draped and you are happy and excited about your garment. Now you need to take it off and transfer it to paper. Why? Remember, the muslin is only part of the pattern making process. In order to reuse the pattern and create garments out of different fabrics and different sizes, you will need a paper pattern. So, how do we go from fabric on the dress form to pattern on paper? Step 1. Marking. Create all the important markings such as your bust, waist, hip lines, your sewing lines, your dart legs, notches and drill holes with a fabric marker, pen or pencil. Step 2. Remove the pins. Gently remove the fabric from the dress form. And step 3. Iron all the panels. Iron the panels to get rid of any folds and creases that may influence the fit. Step 4. Trace on paper. Place or pin fabric to paper and trace all the important marks. The tracing wheel will be very handy during this stage of the process. Step 5. True the pattern. Smooth out all the lines and curves to create a perfect pattern. And step 6. Include all of the important information, including grain lines, seam allowance, and symbols onto the finished paper pattern. Before we end the lesson, let's look at some draping tips. Cotton twill is your friend. Use the tool to mark your key points. This will really help you keep track of what you're doing, especially when you need to transfer the pattern onto paper. Pin the center front. This will ensure that everything is in balance, the grain line is straight, and to stabilize the fabric when being manipulated. This is a great tip. Cut as you drape. To create a good and smooth fit around the body, don't be afraid to cut into the fabric. The technical term to remove tension in the form of bumps and wrinkles is called bridging the hollows. And another great tip, take a step back. It is important for you to have some distance between you and the dress form. This allows you to take a step back and analyze your design. Remember, it is important for it to be well balanced. Next step is to use good quality pins. This is important, so go for ones with a sharp point and strong enough so that they don't bend as you pin the fabric to the dress form. And another important tip is to not distort the grain line. Be gentle when draping and always check the balance of the warp and the weft grain. Never pull the fabric. Remember to drape all of the pattern pieces of the garment. We have already been through this, but take your time by focusing on each individual piece before putting the garment or pattern together. And then mark the curved lines with small dots or a broken line to ensure a better or more correct curved line. Although this is the oldest method of creating clothing, it is not an easy process. Hopefully, some of these draping tips will help unleash your creativity and give you some confidence. Although to some draping may seem like a scary approach to creating patterns, it is actually one of the areas in the design process where the designer can be more creative. Sometimes, by touching and playing with fabric, experimenting with darts, pleats, and fold placements, designers come up with designs they never would have imagined sitting with a pencil in hand. Since most of us do not own a dress form yet, this challenge will be a bit more research-focused. I want you to look at some designers and find one that is known for their draped designs or your favorite design that is draped. Please share an image of your favorite design or designer on social media and our Shaw Academy Facebook group and use the hashtag #ShawFashionDrape. I look forward to seeing many beautiful designs that are draped to perfection. Before you pop off, I just want to remind you that you have a lesson assignment to complete. These assignments are a great way to prepare yourself for your last final module assignment. And just like that, we have completed lesson 2. Congratulations, guys! I hope you are enjoying module 4 as much as I have enjoyed stitching it together. I hope to see all of you back here in my virtual classroom for lesson 3, the art of construction. Do you guys remember our quote? Francisco said, "For me, it is almost impossible to start without draping." I am always amazed at how draping a piece of fabric can bring your design ideas to life right before your eyes. We are all creative in our own way. Some like to design with a pencil in hand. Some feel inspired when looking at a flat basic pattern block. And some feel they're most creative wrapping, playing, and pinning fabric around a dress form. There is no right or wrong way. There is only your way. But to truly discover where you are the most creative, you need to experiment with all of the above. I hope you are eager to dive in and discover what kind of designer you are. Until next time, as always, stay fashionable.